Hey, Elliot.
Hey, Brian.
What's the talk of the table?
Today, we are joined by Joaquin Saavedra, aka Wax, along with Dil Briones. Together, they are the team behind Gubat Banwa, the award-winning role-playing game of war, drama, and martial arts tactics set in a mythic, classical Southeast Asia. Wax is a writer of speculative fiction novels and tabletop games. In addition to his own work, Wax helped write and research the acclaimed Islands of Sina Una. Dil is an illustrator and art director known for his work on Karandun and Gubat Banwa. The new edition of Gubat Banwa is headed to Kickstarter on October 10th, so we thought it was the perfect time to talk to the team behind this epic game. Wax and Dil, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Hello.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us, yeah.
Thanks for being here. So we kind of caught wind of Gubat Banwa on Twitter when we came across the Kickstarter pre-save link not too long ago, and we were very much piqued with the immediate sense of style that this game had, especially in those first images that we saw. There was just so much coming at you. And honestly, the line "violence until glory" will kind of stop anyone in their tracks. But as we kind of looked into it, I really loved seeing all of the... It's rare that I've seen such a mix of role-playing, but also very tactical stuff. So I want to get into all of that. But to start, can you give us, what is the log line? What is Gubat Banwa in a nutshell?
Right. So the name itself actually kind of gives it away. If you speak the language, if you speak Bisaya, it kind of means warring realms, warring states, or battle realms. Gubat means war, and Banwa means realm or land. That's sort of the log line. That's the main thing about Gubat Banwa. It's a game of war stories, of war drama, as we like to say, because there's a lot of interesting narratives and stories that arise from conflicts and ritual violences between cultures, between communities, between families. That is not uncommon here in the Philippines and even in the history of Southeast Asia. So we really wanted to focus in on that. And at first, it was kind of an excuse for me to justify making such a violence-focused game. But eventually, it did turn out to be a major philosophical guideline for how we reckon with the cultures of our past, with our histories that are gone now to us, and with the modern sort of problems we also have to deal with related to culture and history and tradition over here in the Philippines, at least. But yeah, it's a tactical war drama game. At first, I pitched it to Dylan as Final Fantasy Tactics, but in Southeast Asia.
It's a good pitch.
Yeah, and he really liked that, and I was like, it arose because I read that the main form of warring in Southeast Asia, at least in maritime Southeast Asia, was sea raiding, raiding in the sea. So it kind of makes sense that you had 6 people fighting against 6 people, kind of thing, and that's usually what it looked like in FFT, right, or in Tactics Ogre and stuff like that. And we're both big fans of Final Fantasy Tactics.
That was basically the pitch. Wax was like, "Hey, you want to make this?" And I'm like, "Can we?" And then, "Can we though?" And then it was very intriguing. It's like, "Yeah, sure, why not?" And then I remember a point because we were in the middle of our collaboration on Karandun, and then I was just finishing up the work I did, and then Wax was like, "Hey, Dil, is Gubat Banwa grammatically correct?" And I'm like, "Yeah, why?" Then came the pitch, and here we are 3 years later.
The coolest collaborations start with an obscure question from one friend to another, I think, often.
Right.
Yeah, it feels about right.
So Gubat Banwa is the name of the game, but it's also the name of the setting for which you guys won an Indie Groundbreaker Award for Best Setting. So I'd love to hear about, within Gubat Banwa, the game, what is Gubat Banwa, the setting?
Right. It's also called Gubat Banwa. A real quick primer about the game is that there are 3 major realms that are also subdivided. So for example, the Sky World has a place called Hangin Banwa, which kind of just means wind.
The realms of wind.
Yeah, realm wind, a wind realm or air realm, stuff like that. So it's kind of also inspired by like Buddhist cosmology. So basically, there is the sky world, and then there's the earth world, which includes the earth itself as well as like hell, right? Like underworld. And then in the middle of it all is the realm of mortals. And that is the realm called Gubat Banwa. It's the realm of fighting, of combat, of violence. It's a sort of metaphor for how life is a struggle, right? Life is a struggle. Life is conflict. Life is to strive is a violence in and of itself. So that's the name of like the mortal realms. If we had to speak in like D&D speak, it would be like the material
Yeah.
world in like Faerun or something.
I'm actually interested. This leads well into the next question because you mentioned D&D. So a big reason that this game caught our interest and stands out among, fantasy role-playing games is that it is set in a mythical Southeast Asia. And so I'm wondering, when you first came to this idea, you first came to the creation of it, were you thinking of it partially as a response to Western fantasy, or was it an act of creation and celebration all its own, or is the answer somewhere in between those?
On my end, when I made it, it's both of those things actually. One, I've never been sort of like really into like Western fantasy aesthetics. I was really into like Japanese, Chinese, and Indian kind of aesthetics. So when I started doing my research on Southeast Asian stuff, which does include like the Philippines all the way to like Myanmar, right, and Cambodia. It is sort of like falling in love with heritage, with cultures that you've lived through. So it was at first just like a response, like there has to be more than just this, right? And then eventually it grew into an active appreciation and celebration of our stories basically. And that's why I very often describe Gubat Banwa as a feast, right? It's a glorious feast that everyone is invited to because it is a celebration. And sometimes feasts can be messy, but that's the fun part of it.
Yeah, I mean, like to dial it back a bit, like in the timeline. Originally, Wax had a different name for the setting,
I did.
and then like he pitched it as like this is a more like my culture, the Visayan. It's like I'm from the Central Philippines, and we have a different culture. So I'm like, we have different cultures in the Philippines, and then he's like, why don't we do something like this? I'm like, okay, but then it went past just representations of certain cultures to connect the Philippines to the rest of Southeast Asia because like these are very arbitrary lines and our cultures like all the way down to Indonesia and mainland Southeast Asia, we were very much interconnected.
Yeah.
It's not often that we get to celebrate the diversity of Philippine culture. And what's more, like, it's not often that we celebrate the Philippines like in relation to the rest of Southeast Asia. So that was like a big drive for us.
I do really love the description of it as a feast because especially like just from a purely amount of text, like this is currently the PDF we were looking at is a 667 page PDF. So I mean like just on that merit alone, it is a feast of words and of picture. It's a menagerie of everything. So as we were looking through it, there's just like so much to look through and so much fun stuff. I'm curious if you could pull out a couple of like big items that you think would be interesting to people who aren't within the Filipino culture that looking at this game would be particularly like surprising or interesting or exciting to play.
If you look at like the disciplines, like the classes you get to play, the first thing you see is a knight riding a crocodile. That was kind of a statement.
Yeah.
Like for the most part. But like, I think early on in the development of Gubat Banwa, like when I was first tasked to draw like the character classes, right, the disciplines, Wax was like, "Hey, we have a swordfish rider," and I'm like, "All right, sure, I can do that." And then when that came out, like that was basically people remember the guy riding the crocodile and the guy riding the swordfish, and I was like, "Yeah." And from there, it just gets better.
Yeah. It's a flying swordfish too with wings.
Yeah.
And that concept actually comes from actual like folk tales and stories here from the Philippines and like the Iloilo region and stuff like that. So a lot of it does come from like cultures that I've collected. But I guess another like cool thing people might like, if they're from outside Southeast Asian culture, they'll probably really like the martial bent of it, like the martial arts bent. As Dylan always mentions, almost everyone in the team practices a Filipino martial art. So we do like add a lot of martial art stuff. I mean, Gubat Banwa itself is martial art. It's a martial art game,
Yeah.
right? So I guess like people that like wuxia stuff, right? Like
Yeah.
or like those Hong Kong Jackie Chan movies and stuff like that.
Yeah, or where they have when you see like the rhythm of a sword fight and the storytelling, like something like Hero, right?
Yeah.
Like when you have like Jet Li and Donnie Yen like fighting in the rain.
Yes. Or like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon stuff, where like the sword fights is the storytelling.
Yeah.
If people like that kind of usage of violence, right, they will definitely like Gubat Banwa because we're very like kind of very nuanced when it comes to the depiction of violence in the game.
And of course, like we always go back to like what started this conversation was our mutual love for like Final Fantasy Tactics.
Yeah.
And how how even in a battlefield you have all these conflicting like factions and
Yeah.
these conflicting agendas and these motivations for these warriors to like fight, and how that entangles like people change allegiances.
Yeah.
And like what that does to personal relationships, and that's all very interesting stuff that we also go back to.
Yeah.
And it's still at the forefront of Gubat Banwa until now.
Yeah.
We've managed to like keep that focus too.
The main sort of like image we had in mind, I had in mind while I was writing the mechanics, was the sudden mid-fight dialogue in Final Fantasy Tactics.
Yeah.
They'd say shit like, "Oh, Argath, you unrighteous cur," and
Yeah.
then they'd get angrier, and then the fight gets cooler, right? So it's stuff like that.
I do really want to talk about the mechanics of this game, because as we're reading through, there's so many cool like little things that got me excited about it, especially getting something that is so tactical. Because I feel like there are more games that we're talking about, at least on this show and on our other show, that kind of move away from like the very tactical nature of like combat. This one just like dives into battle tactics, which I love and was really excited to read. Just real quick before we kind of get into the meat and potatoes of some of this stuff, can you give us just a quick download on like the core mechanic for this game? Like, what is the core dice mechanic?
Right. The core dice mechanic for Gubat Banwa is called Divine the Will of the Ancestors. And it's inspired by the fact that ancient soothsayers in the Bisaya region of the Philippines would cast crocodile teeth or boar tusks to divine the omens for a particular activity or ritual. And I thought, hey, that's pretty cool. Like why D10s kind of look like teeth.
Like crocodiles.
Yeah, the crocodile's teeth. So that's the main reason why the core mechanic or the core like dice mechanic of Gubat Banwa is the player rolls a number of D10s equal to their stat, like their action rating, and then they have to find out the difficulty as it follows from the fiction, and then that has a numerical rating from there, and you roll that many D8s, and then you roll them both together, and then you look for 6 pluses on both D10s and D8s, right? Every 6 plus on a D10 is a hit, and every 6 plus on the D8s are failures. And then you cancel out hits and failures, and then you see if there are still hits left, that's a complete success. If there are no hits left, that's a partial success. If there are failures only left, then that's a full failure. And then a lot of the game's mechanics revolve around the interesting consequences and the interesting complications that can arise from the fiction moving forward because of that.
I was especially struck by, Brian was just talking about like the tactics is the first thing that sort of pulls you in about these mechanics, but yet you guys have also put in some like really, really neat, intentional story forward mechanics within these tactics, which I love. Like there's the action you can do in a round of combat, or a resound of combat, apologies, that is hearten, which is the equivalent to like a help action in other game. And what I loved about this is that it's like if you succeed in helping them, they now have debt to you, but if you fail, the game tells you that they have to answer the question of how they feel about your help not helping. So can you talk a little bit about bringing in these also really story forward mechanics within these tactics?
Right. Yeah. We touched upon it earlier. The fact that we love the dialogue in mid fight events, right? In Final Fantasy Tactics and Tactics Ogre, and we sort of sought to emulate that kind of feel in our mechanics. So a lot of the time, a lot of the mechanics think in sort of not like story first way, but like in a fiction first kind of way, and a lot of the mechanics there also kind of ask the player what their character feels about the situation, because that's a sort of GMing hack that I've been able to learn recently. Is if something happens, you ask the player what their characters feel about it, or how they react to it, and they that almost always, like, helps them dive deeper into their character, and you really need to prompt people to do that, and eventually they'll start doing it on their own.
Yeah.
It's just super. That's where the fun, really happens. So a lot of the mechanics emulate that. It focuses on the feelings of the characters and how they are reacting to the world.
Yeah, if the violence isn't personal in the beginning, it will be.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. If there's violence, there's always a reason for it, right? So yeah.
I relate when I first read the Hearten mechanic, the idea of like giving someone, quote unquote, like a help action and then getting debt from that. I thought that was such a great idea. Like I really loved that when I first started, mostly because just as like a game designer, I think it's super cool mechanically, but as a game master, I'm like thinking how much fun a table will have with that.
Right.
Something that is in D&D, like a help mechanic is like so ubiquitous. You're doing it all the time. But then you're adding this extra layer to it that all of a sudden gives that mechanic weight and depth and stakes. I really loved that when I read it. There is something very fun about combat in this game as well. And you're talking about like the mid-battle dialogue, the mid-battle like chatting with your opponent. There is something very musical and kind of like I guess musical about combat in this game, even just from like the words used to describe combat. Just like, the turn order is the rhythm. The rounds are not rounds, they're resounds, as in the resounding of a gong. You have, your turn is a riff. Your riff is made of 3 beats. Like everything is very musical, and this kind of even just having those words on the page gives you this feel of much more of like a dance or a song to this, that makes a combat feel already more cinematic and interesting, because you're thinking of it in these very like musical terms, rather than I'm going to punch your hit points, you're going to punch my hit points, and we're going to see who punches the other's hit points faster. I realize I don't have a question for that. I just liked it.
I'm glad you like it.
Yeah, we're glad you like it. It was. That's actually kind of a point of contention, because I know a lot of people kind of get ruffled because a lot of them just say, "Why don't you just call it rounds? Why do you call it turns? It's harder for us to like adapt to the terminology." And honestly, like that's valid, obviously. But I think there are some things that you have to stick to your guns to when it comes to design. And one of the main things is that I didn't want combat to sound like a chess game, right? Or I didn't want it to sound like a military engagement. I wanted it to sound like a war dance. And in our pre-colonial traditions, that's very commonly done with the gong, the agong, which is where gong comes from anyway.
Yeah.
Agong.
They brought those things into battle. And
Yeah,
so,
they brought agong into battle. They would play that. They're like war drums, right? They would play that dung 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 dung, and then they would fight to the beat. So that's the main sort of reason why we put it in there. Most of the mechanics are there because they come from a very Southeast Asian tradition
Yeah.
that we wanted to highlight, right, in the game, with the game.
And people tend to appreciate that. Like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, once they get it, they really get into the rhythm of the play.
Yeah.
Like, with no pun intended, but they get really into it.
And I think it's definitely the right call because I understand why someone might, whenever you see like new words for things that you are familiar with, like, why don't you just call it around? I get it on some level. But when you start adapting to the game, you start understanding and like getting into the game itself. Like, just by saying, oh, it's this resound, you're already putting yourself into the game. You're putting yourself into that musical headspace so that you are more likely to accomplish what the game is trying to get you to accomplish, to think of battle and combat this way, to think of role playing this way, rather than, oh, this is D&D, but with a Southeast Asian bent. It's not. This is its own thing, and it needs its own vocabulary to express itself.
And I feel like it helps with immersion. I feel like that's the word that's coming to mind for me, is that like speaking with this vocabulary leads to that immersion into this world that you've created. And I think that, if there's one thing that's like a real through line in this, is that you guys have been very intentional about vocabulary throughout the game, the use of how you're describing terms, and then especially within this combat. And I think that right away it creates this immersion into, I loved this historical battle you described, if they would actually pull the gong out and be hitting it like a war drum. You get that immersion by using these terms, or it's like at least makes that immersion much easier.
I like that I said a whole long thing and you said the word immersion, and I realized that's the only word I needed to say. I was just dancing around a word until I found it, and I never did.
It's all good. That's why we co-host.
Exactly. There we go.
So the other piece of the tactical element that, before we move away from mechanics, is that this is a grid battle. And there's this thing that caught, I know, Brian and myself, is that you're kind of collaboratively building the battlefield
I love
as
this.
like as a table. Can you talk a little bit about like the grid battle aspect of combat in this game?
Right. Yeah. So as we've said, we love Final Fantasy Tactics. Specifically, we love how they look like dioramas. I know, like, the developer of FFT has come out to say that he really liked dioramas when he was a kid or something. So we really like that sort of aesthetic. The grid battlefield is important because, other than coming from the strain of tactical RPGs like Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition, it's also a way to sort of have like really minute positioning mechanics and stuff like that, which is always really fun if the people are bought into it. The grid has the grid let you can move like diagonally in this game, like normally. And I know, like, that's a thing in a lot of like tactics games that, so diagonal should be 2 points of movement, or diagonal should be 1 2 1, stuff like that. We just went with 1 because the sort of movement that you see in FMA is very triangular. It's very weird angles, and also being able to move in 8 directions and being able to attack in 8 directions is pretty important, because the 8 direction thing is important in Southeast Asian religions. The number 8 is important is a sort of repeating number in Filipino folk epics. So that's why we went with a square grid instead of a hex grid. Even though I feel like my life would be a lot easier if it was a hex grid. And yeah, the collaborative battlefield building aspect is because when I was writing the game, I'm not particularly a fan of the sort of power dynamic that comes with putting one person as the dungeon master and then everyone else as the player. I wanted the Umalagad, which is the name of the game master in this game, Umalagad, which means guardian spirit or ancestor spirit. I wanted the Umalagad to feel like they're a player as well. I want them to have fun as well, because playing an Umalagad is just a different role, right? It's still a role that you play. So sometimes we do a lot of mechanics to offload a lot of the effort that Umalagad has to do so that they can have their fun. So sometimes when you arrive at a combat scene and the one running the game is like, oh, I haven't prepared for this, right? Or I haven't prepared a map for this and stuff like that. We put in the mechanic that, oh, everyone in the table can add a little thing to the battlefield that follows the fiction, so that the onus isn't always on the Umalagad to pre-prepare maps all the time. In this way, you can do like improvisational grid combat, which is something very hard to do in other like grid games. So yeah, that's like the main reason why we did that. I actually stole that idea from Ryutama, which is a Japanese role-playing game.
Oh, yeah.
When you start your fight there, you define like 3 traits about the fight, which I really loved. That was really fun. So I put that in Gubat Banwa as well. And it usually ends up doing pretty well. Everyone can imagine the battlefield a little bit better.
Yeah, they feel like they have a stake in it as well.
Yeah, exactly. They have a
It's
stake
not
in
just
it.
like, it's not just the, like, say, a game master like dictating. So the relationship the player has with the battlefield like actually changes. It's less antagonistic in a way.
Yeah.
Like you're not fighting against the game master. Like you're actually like, okay, I want the fight to have something like this, and then like it, like Wax said, it offloads a lot of the work, but it also like adds to the whole collaborative nature of the thing.
Yeah. And finally, I guess it's important to note, like, in the sort of design principles of Gubat Banwa, I laid out that there are 3 major pillars of combat in almost every tactical combat game, and that's the player characters, the enemies, and the battlefield. So all 3 of those parameters, you want them to be like really high up when it comes to like their complexity and stuff like that. So that's why the battlefield, we have a lot of of mechanics for weather, for terrain. Like we have 2 different water types just to enforce that idea of naturalistic fighting. And then the one of the most important parts of the battlefield in Gubat Banwa is the elevations, which is like shifting elevations. Very important in Gubat Banwa because if you attack from a higher elevation, you get more dice. But if you attack from a lower elevation, you get less dice. And that really helps feed into the positioning mechanics of the game, as well as it just harkens back to when we were kids and we'd be playing on the hills of the Philippines with sticks and rocks and
Or
any
on a beach.
or on
you
a
know,
beach, exactly. And
the
anyone
big
who was
rocks
like
on the beach.
anyone who was like on a higher ground, they did have advantage and you didn't know what to do. And it was, so yeah.
It is nice to finally have like jump be a stat that I care about. Like, I
Right.
feel like in every other game, jump is just like a thing that comes up every now and then. This is important tactically. How high can you jump? It's going to depend.
I love that this collaborative battlefield building, it feels like it's just like removing a barrier that exists in a lot of tactical combat games where, or I guess at D&D, where you enter a combat scenario and you have to say like, oh, can I get a lay of the land? Like you're taking up time to get the information from the dungeon master of what the lay of the land is. Are there obstacles you can hide behind? Are there things you can move? And this game, it's like, oh no, you're right there. Like we're moving. I haven't had a chance to play this game yet, but it feels like combat would just feel like this frenetic movement, inspired much by martial arts, and so that's super exciting. I love that.
Midnight Muscadines is a cozy, dark tabletop role-playing game where light and shadow intertwine in a fractured world. Players take on the roles of marmoteers, brave adventurers who journey into the untamed wilderness to collect the elusive Midnight Muscadines, craft magical jams, and protect the fragile light of Nim. Through collaborative storytelling and resourceful gameplay, players weave tales of courage, community, and the pursuit of balance. Will you preserve the light, uncover the truths hidden in the shadows, or reshape the balance of the world forever? Midnight Muscadines is perfect for fans of Studio Ghibli and Sea of Stars who seek to capture the magic of exploration and the heartfelt adventure in a world where small heroes make a big impact. Play Midnight Muscadines as a traditional GM'd game, GMless, or even solo. Midnight Muscadines is crowdfunding now on BackerKit. Join the campaign at pandeongames.com/muscadines.
I'm Quinns of tabletop role-playing game review show Quinn's Quest, and this is Play to Find Out. Play to Find Out is an actual play podcast that brings notorious old games from the 80s and 90s back to the table. Each season of Play to Find Out, I'm joined by Emily Johnson and Rob Morgan.
Good? Nervous?
Yeah.
You both looked at each other really concerned, like you think what's about to happen is going to be unpleasant. And frankly, I think that's rude.
And together, we explore the TTRPGs of ages gone by. Our goal, to separate the TTRPGs that deserve to be remembered from those that maybe don't. I don't know, Emily. It was the 80s.
Also,
a lot of people were on cocaine. We blow the dust from decrepit systems to learn how they work. Your 100 on the encounter table bursts out. Right, you've encountered a bug. Get ready. Don't laugh.
Does one get ready for a fog?
Don't laugh. Encounter their unique quirks.
I do finger guns to cover up how I wince.
A weird thing happens as you do finger guns.
Oh no.
And I'm hoping that the Quinn's Quest community will join us in exploring these games too. If you this up, cannot describe to you how much your adventure ends here.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because the best way to learn is to play to find out. Play to Find Out is available now on the Quinn's Quest Patreon, but the first episode of each series streams for free on the Quinn's Quest YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts. Anyway, you failed the Earthtech roll, and you made jokes while I was doing my exposition, so you don't get to hear any more.
Oh, no. Come on.
I was shook as...
I also really love that we've been playing more GM-less games on our other show, My First Dungeon, and we've been talking about them on this show. And because of playing GM-less games, I've gotten it in my head more of like having collaborative aspects in games where it's like, you walk into a tavern and you turn to one of your players and go, who do you know here? Or like you kind of allow them to act as a game master. You allow them the act of creation within the game.
Yeah, exactly.
For whatever reason, but until I read Gubat Banwa, I had never seen nor actually even thought of, hey, you could do the same thing with combat. Of like, hey, what does the battlefield look like? What is the weather? What is the like? It just truly hadn't crossed my mind. And the second I read that, I was like, of course you can do that. And then like it's an excellent idea. So I really love that, stretching that collaborative nature past just role play, where I think that to me is like almost a ubiquity now, but in combat it very much was not. So I'm excited to, even in other games, like start adding that in as just like a thing in kind of the your GM's toolkit. The one last, I don't actually know if I have a question, but I really love when we were reading through the mechanics of this game, I came across Thunderbolts, which is kind of like an in-game, like a meta currency you can spend as a player to add. So for instance, Thunderbolts are I'm just reading from the document. You can spend one Thunderbolt to gain +1 hit or +1 parry, spend one to re-roll any roll, and then as you spend higher numbers, you could do like more stuff. Stirring your riff and violence, you could gain +1 beat. I really love the idea of having this kind of meta currency that you can earn and then spend and like make your turns more epic. I guess I'm curious, where did that, in the design process, was that a thing you guys wanted in from the beginning? Or was that something that came out as you were like play testing, of having this additional way to make your riffs in violence even more interesting and epic?
Mechanically speaking, I guess it's just be quick, but we've always had the mechanic for when you describe your attack, your movement, your defenses in a really cool way, you get extra stuff for it. The Thunderbolt is the most recent and the best sort of implementation of that mechanic. It sort of arose from because I'm like an Exalted fan. I don't know if you know Exalted. Exalted has like a stunting system, but this one is you get Thunderbolts and you can spend it at any time. It was there at first because we wanted people to really get into the fiction of their fighting styles, of how they're moving around, and it's been pretty effective. So if someone does like a normal move action, right, which is called a rush in this game, when they rush, they very often, unless it's like late into the fight and they have enough thunderbolts already, very often they don't just go, okay, I go 1, 2, 3, 4, I have a speed of 4. They don't go like that. They describe themselves vaulting over vines, stepping across the winds, right?
They say things.
Yeah, they say things. They ride on their dragon companions and shit like that, right? Which is super cool already. And then getting to spend Thunderbolt is because very often when I see people describing their characters in that way, they get this sort of momentum to do even cooler and cooler and cooler shit every time it's their turn, which I think is good. Like they're reveling in the role playing experience. And then recently, like a lot of players that I've had would be like, "Oh, can I change the weather? Can I describe this? Can I say that a thunderstorm
I
happens?"
love that.
And like I always go, "Yes, of course. That's fucking cool," because they catch the lightning and they use it as their sword. Like shit, they say shit like that. That's super cool. And so I sort of went like, "Hey, those are." Changing the weather, changing the terrain, getting more stuff to do during your riff, getting stronger during your riff, those are like pretty important things in the combat of this game. Why don't we make it so that they can manipulate it? They can actually it hooks onto the mechanics of the game. So that's where the main thing of Thunderbolts came in. And additionally, I guess the more pragmatic reason for why, or practical reason why Thunderbolts are in the game, is because a lot of the math is actually skewed against the Kadungganan, against the player characters, because only the player characters have access to Thunderbolts and some special, like really powerful enemies and stuff like that, right? So the enemies all have like really high stats to offset the player characters having supreme versatility with all their options, as well as having more health generally, and also because they have access to Thunderbolt. So if they want to survive, if they want to not die in this game, they have to do cool shit.
You have to get into it.
They have to get into it, or else the math of the game is inherently
Stacked.
written
Yeah.
against Kadungganan.
You have no choice. You have to be
no
extra.
choice. Yeah. So you have to be like an extra motherfucker. So yeah.
I really love a mechanic that like forces you into role and also like rewards you for trying things. And I love mechanics that reward failure or reward just like action, reward cool stuff, reward trying cool stuff, and reward like just being a badass, badass character.
Hell yeah.
I love what she said also about momentum. I feel like it like I can feel how that would play in combat. Like you're gradually accruing thunderbolts by being cool, and then by the time you have a bunch of thunderbolts in your later rounds, you're being even cooler, and you're creating this like ramp up of the battle, which is a very cool idea.
I do have a kind of a general question about mechanics, because you guys said you've been working on this game for a couple of years now, and obviously have been like play testing it and playing it and having fun. I'm always curious with new games, especially something as like big as this. This isn't like a rules light game. This is a game that has a lot of mechanics and a lot of things you can do. I mean, 667 page PDF. There's a lot of stuff there. I'm curious, when you're introducing new players to this game, what aspects of it have you found they latch on to the most or like the quickest? Is there a mechanics thing that you feel like has been like, I guess, what's the most successful thing you've found from this game as far as like the player experience?
So far, from what I've, because this game has gone through a lot of iterations, but the few things that sort of stuck around is, the Thunderbolt mechanic. People really like that because it also serves as a way to bridge narrative or like drama mode with violence mode, because the Thunderbolts you get from being a dramatic bitch in drama mode carries over to violence.
Yeah.
Right? And the violent things you do in violence mode carries over to drama. So it feeds into each other. So that's been a real winner.
I find that when people create their character and it's all good, right? Like they see all these like cultures and stuff that they can be, and then they get to the part where they have to roll a complication. So that's the one that's been there in the game for literally since day one.
Yeah.
And and the complication you roll is usually like a built-in backstory between you and another player character. So there's always gonna be some really messy, oh, this guy killed my parent or whatever, but I have to fight alongside them, and or this person loves this other person, but this other person doesn't love me. It becomes like in Berserk with
Yeah.
with Guts, and Griffith, and Casca. It becomes kind of like that, and like I remember like people trying it for the first time. Like when they see that part, they go, oh, and then you already
no.
have a built-in party dynamic by the time you're done with character creation, because you have all these things like brewing underneath like your basic goal as these badass martial artists. Like,
Yeah.
you already have these complications in the very beginning,
Yeah.
and how that plays out and how that adds to the whole, like, you're this extra because of this, and then you have to, and that also like adds to the whole debt thing when you help someone, right? And then they have to roll like if they have a debt, but what if they have a complication with you, like they actually want to kill you by the time this is done.
Yeah.
So that feeds to like the, like as Wax like mentioned, like at a point in development where the drama feeds the violence, like the non-combat RP will feed into the combat, and vice versa.
It leads to some very complications. You're right that saying complications is the main thing that's never gone away. It's the one part everyone loves. It makes character creation into a point of play, and also it makes it so that quote unquote suboptimal play in the tactical combat would technically be optimal. So we've had a character before that had a complication wherein they hated this other character, but this other character was their healer, right? So they would always move away from their healer to not get healed because they really hated him. And then there is a rule in the game where if you do something dramatic, you get a thunderbolt. So even though they won't get healing, they still get thunderbolts for doing that. So, it feeds into itself. It's really good.
Yeah.
Hearing you just say that, because so I haven't watched like an actual play of this game yet. I've only read a good chunk of the book. Can you just like, because you guys have play tested this a bunch and you've played it a bunch, can you just tell us like a cool story from one of the games? Like what's an epic moment that you remember from playing a session of this? Just to give us like a real like nitty gritty taste of like the coolest thing you've seen happen in this game, or like the most memorable thing or the most exciting thing.
I'll go first. This one, there's really a lot, so I'll go with the most recent one. And it's this one from a Twitch stream I did, with Juliciel. Their characters were ex-lovers. They kind of hated each other. But the thing was, one of the exes was a Senapati, which is this game's version of like Warlord from 4th edition. And one of the basic attacks of the Senapati is they can make another guy attack, right, during their turn. So they're like an enabler class, right? And then the other X was this really powerful Baril Witch, which is a gun mage, basically. Every time they shoot, they get a gun charge, and if they get too many gun charges, they explode.
Oh hell yeah!
Because bullets and guns are very volatile in this game. They're explicitly like magical stuff, like they're alchemical magical stuff. So there was one point in the final battle, in the boss fight, basically, where the X was like, "You ex-lover, shoot this man," and then if he had shot that enemy, they wouldn't have lost so much HP. But then the player looked at me and went, "No, I don't think I will," and then so he spent a beat to make another guy, or an action to make another guy attack, and then he said, "No, I'm not gonna attack because I hate this guy." And I was like, "Okay, that's perfect. Both of you get a thunderbolt for that." But he does not attack. Super suboptimal choice. It could have cost them their life, but it was dramatic as fuck, and that's what the game is about. So I was like, I love that. We'll do that for sure.
I love how messy you've made this game. I love a messy game.
I love it.
It's so messy.
Yeah, like I remember one, like in a previous playtest, like the character I was playing had this complication with this other character, could move, basically like transport they had a mount, so they could transport like my guy through the battlefield.
Yeah, they could taxi.
Yeah, like a taxi, but like instead of like this person really hated my guy's gut, so instead of like carrying him on the back, he like my character was literally dragged by the arm, like through half the battlefield, and then my guy had to like it was struggling because like it was like a dominance thing, so he didn't even react.
Right. Yeah.
Right, like he wasn't gonna give this person the pleasure of like I brought you here and I messed you up. It's like all right, let's go. Like,
Yeah. It's perfect.
it plays into a lot of the ego stuff.
Yeah, I love all these like really ego fueled characters trying to get along and like the drama of mid combat. It reminds me of like I know you brought up Final Fantasy Tactics a lot, but it also feels very like anime. Like the things I love about different animes is where people are having dramatic interactions mid combat and like one liners and things like that. So because we're kind of getting tight on time, I'd love to move into this upcoming Kickstarter you have, and sort of I have a question to lead into that for Dill, which is the thing that struck me about this game right away is the visual style of it. That's what like really pulled me in. I think there's like a color palette here that is really beautiful and unique. And I'm curious sort of how you've thought about the art direction and visuals for the game. And as you go into this Kickstarter, how are the visuals being updated for the Kickstarter?
Oh, that's great. That's a great question. Real quick, like before we started on Gubat Banwa, Wax showed me like this very famous work by Zedek Chu. It's an OSR book, Thousand Islands. It's very Southeast Asian work, right? And Zedek's like Malaysian, right?
Yeah, Malaysia.
Yeah, it's very like it was a lot of familiar stuff, but like reading through it, it was very understated, and then like it kind of spools out. Comparing that to like what we were trying to do, like with the cultures we were trying to represent, we didn't have that luxury of being subtle. Like these are very underrepresented cultures. Like the Philippines is not a monoculture. Like we're 180 languages, how many islands, So you didn't have the luxury to be subtle or clever in that way. So it had to be loud. It had to be really in your face. So Wax writes in a very particular way. Our collaboration works like this. So Wax writes something that I go, oh, wow. And then I have to draw something that melts their face off. So it becomes like a one-upmanship. Like every time like I draw for this game or like figure out like a certain how a faction would look and do the due diligence, it has to be like, I have to outdo myself each time. Because there's also the aspect of like due diligence. It's a lot of work because we can't, these are things that aren't really like taught in our schools basically. Like a lot of our education is very like focuses on the colonial period. A lot of Philippine media focuses on like the colonial period and these colonial aesthetics. That's fine. That's also in the book. But like we wanted everyone to see something familiar there, like if they're from here or even they're from Southeast Asia. And they do, And again, we had to be loud, bombastic, like here's a crocodile. Here's a guy having a fun time riding a crocodile. His crocodile has war paint and gold, right? Like these aren't things we don't have a fantasy shorthand for. Like admittedly, right? Like that's another thing like we had to deal with. Like I can't just, expect people to like fill in the blanks. Like I have to show everything, like down to the stances, down to like the effects. And then that quickly became a lot of people in the team latched onto that like direction. And now with the Kickstarter, we're also updating like the graphic design. Our graphic designer, Faye, we're going for a look that issues the whole aren't like TTRPGs, almost like encyclopedias. Yeah. We want this to be more kinetic. So if you see like in the previews of the recent layouts, it's even more bombastic, it's even more kinetic. Like it's basically like feeding into it's a coherent message of this is a very, very extra game. This is a very in-your-face game. Like everything, like most of the disciplines will pop out of the page. Like it's coming at you, And you have to figure out, like it's a very vibe based direction, and when you get that vibe, that's when you can like latch onto it, because like a lot of the names for the classes are like aren't even, these aren't things that people will hear and they will know what that is,
Yeah.
right?
Like we don't have paladins.
Yeah, we don't have a shorthand.
Right.
Yeah.
So I have to show you what this is.
Yeah.
And it's gonna be great. And your Wax is gonna describe to you what this is, and it's gonna be great. And you're gonna play this guy on a swordfish, on a flying swordfish, or like this mecha like blacksmith with a
Yeah.
Buddha statue.
Yeah.
All these things. So yeah, like leading up to the Kickstarter, we're going even more in that direction. We're all trying. We're all trying to outdo ourselves.
That is a really interesting position that you're in. It's almost like a double-edged sword, because there isn't a shorthand, like you're saying. So, but that also means there's not preconceived notions. So like you can go and like, yes, that means you have to do like a lot more work on your end to like show everyone and do all this stuff. But that also means that you get to define what those things are.
Right.
Like you get to put a guy on a crocodile and like stake your claim in that.
Right, yeah.
In a way that like if I make a new game that says there's a paladin, everyone kind of already knows like, okay, paladin, he's wearing a big chunky armor and he's gonna have a holy symbol or something.
It's an archetype, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And without that preconceived notion, you guys could just go buck wild and just do whatever you want.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah,
so-
we did. But also, like, like a lot of we knew that, but we also had this responsibility to like, since these are inspired, they're not meant to represent real world cultures, but they're very much inspired by them, right? And so there were a lot of things that we had to like. I had to ask, like from people I knew from cultures that I don't, that I'm not too familiar with. I had to like get their input on a certain thing. For martial arts that I don't practice, I had to talk to like certain like coaches and trainers, like what would this look like, and to make sure that at least like there's a basis for it, and that improves, like there's a verisimilitude, like so even if it's a fantasy, there's a lot of ingredients there in what we made that are basically very familiar. Like people looking through it from here will go, oh, cool. There's a lot of Easter eggs, Like a previous podcast asked me about all the Easter eggs that I put in the art, and like I couldn't I wouldn't be able to stop talking if that were the case.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a whole episode. Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
basically, yeah.
So the other thing that we're kind of curious about with the Kickstarter is obviously Brian mentioned this. This is a hefty, rich, deep text that you've created, full of mechanics and also some really compelling fiction writing and all that. As you go into this Kickstarter, is this going to be a 600-page book, or what's your kind of goal for what this book looks like at the end of this Kickstarter?
Actually, the reason why it's 600
Yeah.
pages right now is because I made it in a way that it's easy to read on digital devices.
Yeah, it's just a PDF.
Because it's just a PDF, so it's like it's good for iPads, it's good for laptop screens and stuff like that.
Scrolling through with your phone.
Yeah, or your phone. Yeah, exactly, your phone. That's why it's single column A5. What we're going for the the final PDF is big. It's probably gonna be around. It's actually gonna be probably shorter than 600.
Yeah.
Because it's only 600 right now because of
The current layout.
yeah, because of the current layout. It might cap out at around 400.
Yeah.
Or around 400 for sure, just so that we don't go over printing funds and,
Yeah.
and stuff like that, because that's one of the things we're grappling with right now.
People get really shocked when they like see how big the book is, but then like
600 pages.
no, it's just because the
half of those are white space, so you don't have to worry. Yeah.
Right, and there's so much art. I mean, there's a lot of room
Exactly.
made for
and
great art.
we're working on more. Don't worry.
Yeah. You want it to look good on your coffee table.
Basically, yeah.
Love it.
Yeah, I can't wait to see this become a physical book. I think it'll be beautiful. Are there any design changes coming with the Kickstarter edition, or are you guys is this more about let's turn this design we feel really good about into a nice book?
For the most part, everything is done design-wise at 1.4. The next version really is just for edits and typo fixes. we will still be hiring like a final editor to fix all the text and like the ordering of the text and stuff like that. But for the most part, design wise, we're done. We are set. If you buy the game right now on itch, you will be getting much of the same experience. Really, it hasn't really changed ever since first edition came out. People love the kinetic feel of dice pools. People love the how easy it is to just count sixes when you roll your dice. People love the thunderbolts and
The messy drama and
messy
interpersonal
drama,
relationships,
the
hidden agendas they have to
yeah.
like carry out.
the relatively simple narrative system that is still pretty robust because it can handle almost any dramatic thing you might want to do. So yeah.
And then my question is, so let's like, flash forward 2-3 months from now, or like 2 months from now, and in this future you've blown your Kickstarter out of the water. You've hit all your dream goals and all your stretch goals and all the stuff. What is the future for Gubat Banwa? Like, what are your dreams and hopes and aspirations for this game? Kind of like long term, like long past when this is a physical book. What do you hope to see out of this game?
When Wax had me like do basically the art direction and the research for like the 5 major factions, right? Like there was so much material there that we want to get into, but we didn't have like, the space. We didn't have the space to. So like we built this setting and we want to like get deeper into it. Like not necessarily expand it, but what's there is already substantial and we want to like dig into it more. Like see what else we can do with it, like certain mechanics, like we had this we already had this goal. Each faction set, like each of the nations you play in is already a different genre of fiction, right? Not just like you have a place that's very conducive to like intrigue, or like there's also a setting for like more sweeping like pirate epics, for lack of a better word. There's things that we want to get into that we've already laid the groundwork for. So I would love to like get into that.
On my end, Gubat Banwa, I am I have a hyperfixation on Southeast Asian cultures. It's my lived experience, and it's something that I feel is very often taken for granted, even within Southeast Asia itself, because of very colonial mentality, stuff like that. So I actually do have a lot of plans for Gubat Banwa. We do want to do large like mechanical supplements for it. Like we want right now I'm writing a very drama based supplement that focuses on expanding the
Mess.
non-combat role playing stuff. Right, you get like you get like dramatic triggers and stuff like that. Anyone that loves like the drama aspect of Gubat Banwa, they can do that even more. I've been playing Crusader Kings recently, so that's that's been feeding a lot of my mechanics thinking. There's gonna be like faction mechanics and stuff like that in that upcoming supplement, so that Katungganan that reach really high levels can play as rajas and datus of their own right, like kings and queens on their own right, stuff like that. But that's just the beginning. We do want to dig deeper to each of the Mahamandalas. We want to create supplements or zines for the lesser known mandalas that are also the other cultures of the Philippines. I've gotten writers for like Sinuku, which is like a very Kapampangan inspired culture, for Ibalnong, which is a Bicol inspired culture.
Like we want everyone to have their time in the sun.
Hell yeah.
I even have like Thai writers that might want to do a Thai inspired empire, an Indonesian inspired kingdom. We really want we really want to revel in these cultures that we really do love, that our grandparents love talking to us about, which a lot of people do take for granted these days because of increasing soft power of other cultures. So I really that's the major goal for Gubat Banwa. Whatever else happens while we're on that path, we'll take it as the Buddha intends. So if we get like a huge break or something, and we get like a video game potentially for Gubat Banwa that's like a tactics RPG. We'd absolutely love that.
Yeah, it's never been a dull moment working on this thing.
Yeah.
Like it's been wild to say the least.
We've had hardware failures like 5 times now.
Yeah,
So-
some files art had to be retrieved
Lots
the hard
of
way.
files lost. So this is a very, very exciting project, if not a bit
Nerve-wracking.
nerve-wracking, and
We are so excited to see this go to Kickstarter. I feel like people are going to respond to it. They've already responded to it in the digital form. I can't wait to see it be a book. So, Wax and Dill, our final question for every episode of the podcast is, what are you each bringing to the table? This might be a person, a game, a book, a show, a resource, something within tabletop, something not within tabletop that you would want to recommend to our audience right now.
I recently came across like this book by this artist I really like, and it was like when I was making Gubat Banwa, it was like it was quite serendipitous to come across it. It's called Alendal. I don't know if you all heard of it. It's a more historical. It's a historical fiction. Its art is beautiful. It's by Alex Nino, one of the legends of Filipino comics. He's worked on heavy metal, and he did concept art for Mulan. It's a beautiful book, and it's written by a filmmaker, Jay Ignacio, who also practices Filipino martial arts. And I got to meet him. And apart from our like shared interests, like I think it's a sweeping epic and a beautiful book, and possibly the final work of Alex Nino, like in terms of comics. It's gonna be his last book, so I always have it nearby, like when I'm working on Gubat Banwa. It's so yeah. Alendal by Jay Ignacio and Alex Nino.
Love that.
So on my end, I think I have. Can I give like 2 related things instead?
Yeah, why not?
2 related books. One is fiction, one is non-fiction. The fiction one is Margo sa Tubig and Sri Bishaya by Ramon Mazones. They are both works. They're both epic fantasy novels of Filipino fantasy, written by Ramon Mazones, who wrote it in Hiligaynon, which is the Ilonggo, Iloilo language. He serialized it first and then collated it into a novel and then translated into English. It's kind of hard to find overseas,
good luck.
but you can find it in Manila. If there's anyone listening that's from Manila, you can find it in the Ateneo shop. It's really good. If for example Gygax was inspired by Mauser and Conan the Barbarian, Ramon Mazones' Margo sa Tubig and Sri Bishaya are the ones that inspired me when it comes to like fantasizing Southeast Asian cultures. And then I guess the most important book that I've read so far for Gubat Banwa that will probably help everyone else sort of reorient their ideas on culture and like anthropology itself is Ancient Southeast Asia by Miksik and Go. It's a Singaporean headed book that tackles almost everything about classical Southeast Asia from pre-classical to post-classical Southeast Asia and even to early modern, which is the colonial period already. The most important takeaway I got there is just how much alike and shared our cultures are, to the point that it's kind of disingenuous to separate our nations apart, because the main reason why our nations are bordered in such a way is because of the partitioning of the colonial powers that were here, right? Indonesia is only in that way because of the Dutch. The Philippines is only like this because of the Spanish. The Malaysians are only like this because of the British. Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia are only like that because of the French. So it was really eye-opening to me and helped reorient a lot of my preconceptions about nations, even in itself, about the cultures that arise from us. It makes the reader focus on the people themselves instead of imagined cultures and imagined histories. And I think it's really beautiful in a kind of way, really makes Southeast Asian culture easier to understand and to grok, because it's such a complex idea.
3 great recommendations. We will link all of those in the show notes for people to check out. So thank you so much, Wax and Dill, for coming on the show. Do you want to let people know where they can find you?
You can find us on gubatbanwa.com.
Yeah, we have On Twitter, we're on Play Gubat Banwa, and we also have www.gubatbanwa.com. Dylan, you can find at Dils Briones.
Yeah.
On Twitter.
Yeah.
And then you can find me as Makapatag anywhere.
And again, the Gubat Banwa Kickstarter launches October 10th. Check out the pre-save link in the description of this episode. And if you want more gaming content from us, check out the 20-sided newsletter and the many-sided media Discord. Those will both be linked in the show notes as well. Please rate, review, and follow Talk of the Table wherever you get your podcasts. Really helps us out and makes us feel good. And that's what the table is talking about. Thanks so much, Wax and Del. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
If you're looking for more great gaming content from everyone here at Many Sided Media, you should consider subscribing to the 20-Sided newsletter. It's a free, bi-monthly newsletter for people who love games, make games, and just love making games. To subscribe, just go to 20sidednewsletter.substack.com or follow the link in the show notes.